That is the sound of a succession plan, blown up, shredded, and burning. It's a year of decision in Livingston, California. On Wednesday, January 29th, 2020, the City Council, with Mayor Samra absent, voted to start the Proposition 218 process of raising water, garbage, and sewer rates. At stake is over $24 million in new wells, filtration systems, pipeline projects, all to address water quality problems Livingston has endured for years. Obvious problems like dirty-looking brown water and the not-so-obvious problems of toxins like arsenic and TCP. It's 2020 in Livingston, a year of decisions that will impact us for years to come. Police Chief Chavez is leaving the PD after less than 1 year of a 2-year contract extension. His last day is to be March 16th, 2020. Why? I have a theory. But first, let's go over a little history. Chief Chavez had been hired in early 2012. Prior to that, Livingston had had more than one interim chief and had already hired and fired a police chief who didn't even last more than 9 months. In fact, he was let go only a couple of days before Christmas 2010. Some people thought politics had something to do with it, something having to do with the new council after the recall. It wasn't just the PD that was affected by the employment revolving door after the recall. At the time, Livingston just couldn't seem to find a city manager or a department head it wanted to hang on to for any length of time. Jose Antonio Ramirez was hired as Livingston's new city manager around August 2011. He also was to resign in January 2014 to pursue other opportunities, only to return a couple years later when Livingston couldn't manage to hire and hang on to a city manager. But that's a whole nother story I might tell sometime down the road. Chief Chavez was hired in early 2012 with a 3-year contract. According to the meeting minutes of the time, Councilmember Samra said Mr. Chavez was hired via one of the most rigid processes they have gone through. And Mayor Espinoza said he and Councilmember Land had sat on the interview panels and both panels did a really good job. The employment agreement was adopted by a 5-0 vote. In 2015, interim city manager Odie Ortiz stated Police Chief Chavez had done a great job addressing the needs of the community. Mayor Pro Tem Samra said Police Chief Chavez goes above and beyond what is required of him. The chief was given a 3-year contract extension in February 2015. Now, 2018 was an election year for the mayor and 3 council members. At the time, City Manager Antonio Ramirez stated that Chief Chavez, at that point in time, wasn't looking to commit to more than a 1-year extension of his contract. I guess that makes sense, given that it was an election year and the makeup of the council could change. The final extension of the chief's contract took place in March of 2019, in which it was extended for 2 more years. The city manager stated that we agreed to keep him for a couple more years to help the city take care of important issues like a succession plan, development of personnel to take on new leadership positions at the PD, and recruitment. The city attorney stated that because planning for the future was important, the time period for the chief to give the city a termination notice was increased from 30 to 90 days. In July of 2019, the chief announced his intention to retire at the end of his contract in March of 2022. The development of a succession plan was also announced. Captain Soria was to retire in September of 2021, with his replacement already in place by July 2021 or so. The plan was that Chief Chavez would retire after Captain Soria did. The recruiting process for a new chief would begin around July of 2021, with Chief Chavez's replacement in place by late January 2022. The succession plan will need some major adjustments now, much depending on how long Captain Soria is willing to play the role of acting chief, postponing his own plans to retire if necessary. And if the PD is like any other bureaucracy I know of, the jockeying for position had already begun when the succession plan was first announced and is surely ramping up in earnest now. What will be interesting to see is the reactions, if any, from members of our city council at the next meeting, which is supposed to take place on March 3rd, unless they decide to cancel it for one reason or another. I'm curious as to what they will say, or maybe not say anything at all, about losing a police chief well over a year before recruitment for a new chief was even scheduled to have begun. I said I had a theory, and I could be wrong, but my gut instinct is it has something to do with politics. Given the reluctance to extend his contract for more than 1 year in 2018, I can only assume there was already some kind of concern that the November elections would bring in a new council and a potential for conflict. Reading between the lines of the 2019 contract extension discussion leads me to believe there may have been some kind of conflict already in place. But there was also the effort to have a new police captain and police chief in place before letting go of Chief Chavez. Remember the secession plan? It was so important in 2019 to meet the goals of the secession plan. The chief's contract was to be amended to require 90 days notice if he intended to terminate his contract with the city before he retired. That would have meant his notice to quit would have had to have been delivered in December 2019, barely 5 months after he announced his retirement plans in July. So his leaving before the contract was up, leaving before the secession plan was accomplished, and leaving before the new captain and chief were hired leads me to think there was some kind of pressure to get rid of him sooner rather than letting him actually finish out his contract. What's next? I can't say I've got a really good answer for that. I'm not privy to any of the behind-the-scenes machinations between the council, the city manager, and the chief. But I will be watching the recruiting process for the chief and new captain just as closely as I can, especially to see if there are candidates for police chief or police captain from the sheriff's department, and just how fast the hiring process will move. But what do you think about all of this? Let me know in the comments. If you're subscribed to the channel already, you might want to check and make sure you're still subscribed so you're notified whenever a new video goes live. And subscribe if you're new. Until next time, this is the Gardening Snail of Livingston, California, because not every critter is hiding under a rock.